Bullseye with Jesse Thorn is a production of MaximumFun.org and is distributed by NPR.
I'm Jesse Thorn. Amy Sherman-Palladino is the mastermind behind the Marvelous Mrs Maisel. She created the Gilmore Girls. She was a writer on Roseanne. Those three are some of the most unique shows to have ever graced our airwaves. They all follow families that were a little bit bonkers, dealing with the ups and downs that life throws us all, finding happiness, rebuilding after loss, what love really means. They're also all about women, but maybe not the kind of women that you expect to see on TV.
And the idea of taking a woman who was not a 1950s housewife who was dissatisfied with her life or staring out a window thinking there's something better out there, but a woman who really loved her life, who really thought, I've scored, this is great, having that ripped out from under her and then discovering this whole other way to live. That was a journey that I thought was worth taking.
It's Bullseye. My guest is the wonderful Amy Sherman-Palladino. She's the creator of The Marvelous Mrs Maisel. The show circles around Midge Maisel and her dysfunctional family. She starts the show as a housewife in 1950s New York. She finds out her husband is having an affair, and she decides to channel her pain into a blossoming stand-up career. The show has been nominated for a ton of Emmys this year. Amy took home a few last year, too. She was the first woman to win an Emmy for Best Comedy Writing and Directing. There are plenty of things that Amy is great at, but her superpower maybe is writing scenes with quick, punchy dialogue. Let's hear a little bit of it. In this clip from The Marvelous Mrs Maisel, Midge and her manager Susie are at a TV studio. Susie has gotten Midge her very first television appearance, and it is every comic's dream breakthrough booking, a telethon.
So this is really happening.
This is really happening.
Talent?
You bet.
You bring your sheet music?
She's not a singer.
I'm a comedian.
Mrs. Maisel?
You're down for 5 minutes at 21:50.
What?
We do military time. 21:50 is 9:50 at night. If you get confused, just add the number 12 to whatever time it is.
At what to what?
Next. Follow me.
Sure.
I'm Sal.
Nice to meet you.
This is Mrs. Maisel, comedian. She does 5 minutes at 21:50. Solo act. Any props?
Nope.
Stand on the X.
Okay.
Mic check.
1, 2.
Next. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Wait, we dragged ourselves down here at 8 o'clock in the morning and that's it?
Perfect.
I showered.
Thank you for showering. We'll see you tomorrow, 1600 hours.
When's that? Wait, Sal.
Things move fast in the television business.
Amy Sherman-Palladino, welcome to Bullseye. It's nice to have you on the show.
Oh, it's so lovely to be here.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. I'm not 100% sure if it was sincere, but it's
It's as sincere as I can muster on the night before a table read. That's what you get.
Now we're talking. What's the table read tomorrow?
Tomorrow we read the last episode of season 3.
Are you nervous about it because things have gone poorly, or is simply because what you have written is now going to come alive and you could potentially be embarrassed?
I don't know that nervous is the exact word. It's a very big show. Our last 2 shows this season are very big, so it's just a little daunting. There'll be a lot of Valium involved, but I think it's all going to be fine.
Well, I am optimistic about it on your behalf.
Oh, good.
And I am glad to have you on the show. You grew up in show business in a very interesting way. Your father was a comic and your mother a dancer.
Yes.
And you kind of grew up to be a comedy dancer.
Yes, I was just a hilarious ballerina. It was just nothing but comedy every time I put toe shoes on.
But I mean, it truly is like you really split the difference. By the time you were done with high school, you were auditioning for dance parts and writing comedy scripts. So was that always what your expectation of what your life would be?
No, I was supposed to be a dancer, and my mother is still waiting for a return on her investment of all those toe shoes, which she hasn't seen yet. But I was not going to be a writer. I had no intention of being a writer. And then I got in an improv group, school, class, something, and I met a girl, and we were bored and out of work and sat around eating ding-dongs and drinking tea, and we wrote a couple of spec scripts just basically for the hell of it, and that got us on Roseanne. And when I got Roseanne, I was not sure I wanted to do it because I was a dancer. I didn't go to an office and 9 to 5. What is that craziness? That's mental. It was a room full of men in jeans and very pristine white sneakers and button-up shirts. And I'm like, this is completely not my world. And yet it was apparently very fortunate that I made that turn because I get to eat now, which I didn't get to do when I was young and danced.
So did you have what it took to be a dancer, especially a ballet dancer? Like, one of the weird things about being a ballet dancer is you can have all of the commitment in the world, and you can even have all the skill in the world and still be wrong for it because your calf is the wrong shape or something. I'm not an expert.
Well, apparently you're an expert on caps, which is all you really need to be. When I was in ballet, I always felt like my body was not the correct ballet body. I was a short waist, I was a jumper and a turner, but I didn't have that elegant, bourrées drove me crazy because anything that was fluttery and light, I wanted to kill myself. I liked what the guys did. I liked the strong stuff. And I went to school my school in LA was a school that Heather Watts, who was a prima ballerina in New York City Ballet, came out of that school. It was a very serious ballet school. And every year, Joffrey would come down and they would hold auditions for their summer program. And 2 or 3 years in a row, they'd be like, you know what, next year. And by the third time I heard next year, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to add some tap and some jazz to this and I'm going to find it. Because it was clear to me that ballet, while I loved it and I loved being on point, which is insane because, it's just horrible for your feet and completely unnatural, but it's just a very fun. It's fun. It's just fun. It's otherworldly. It's a weird superpower when you can get up on your toe and turn. And balance and hold. It's a really freeing sort of interesting way to sort of grow up. And I now I proselytize to all of my friends who have children because I really believe every kid should go to ballet class until they're 10. And then if they want to quit, let them quit. But it gives you such an amazing sense of your body and who you are, and especially girls because your bodies get so weird and everything changes and it's strange. But just to have sort of a balanced sense of yourself and that sort of strength. And, ballet dancers are a little less embarrassed about their bodies because, they smell bad all the time and you're always hanging out with sweat all over you and you're just with each other. When you're doing partnering, some guy's got his hand up your crotch, it's just what it is because that's how you're balancing. It's just it's you sort of lose a little bit of that prudishness about, oh, my body, and oh, I'm so this and look at that. It's a creature. It's this other creature. And I think that dance, to me, I love working with dancers more than anything in the world. We use dancers a lot on our shows because they're disciplined, they're focused, they get paid nothing. If you give them a sandwich, they're happy. So they get paid absolutely nothing. And the fact that it's an art form just purely for the enjoyment of the art form, as opposed to any sort of I'm going to be this famous ballerina and make $1 billion. It doesn't work that way. So one in a million people, there's one Baryshnikov. That's it. It's not one of those art forms that you go into for the commerce of it or I'm going to be world famous. You really go into it for the love and the art of it. And there's something really great about that. And I look back on those days quite fondly, especially when I look in a mirror now and I see what I look like. I just didn't appreciate it.
What kind of comic was your dad? You grew up in the Los Angeles area. Was he working the road or was he writing or what?
Well, my dad, when I was young, he started in the Catskills, as every Jew has to, and he was very much in that sort of that Shecky Greene, Jackie Mason sort of group of comics, and he toured a lot. He toured with Dinah Washington. He toured with Johnny Mathis and Jose Feliciano, and then when we moved out to L.A., or they moved out to L.A., and then they had me there, which I've never, ever forgiven them for because, at least get it on the birth certificate that I was East Coast. I was it's a thing. he did a lot of work for like the Bobby Darin show or the Joey Bishop show, anything with like a name in a show. He was sort of a variety writer for a long time, anything that had to do with jokes and comedy. And then the last, I don't know, 40 years of his life, he did cruises. Was comedy cruises. He was Mr. Saturday Night, and he would go on these cruises, and he was like Bono halfway through because everyone was like 200 years old, and they loved him. And he would go on the cruises, and he would talk about. My dad was a riffer. He was a very stream of conscious kind of guy. You know, he didn't work blue, which is why they loved him. But he could just get on a boat and talk about what was ridiculous on the boat and the people that they met, and because of that, everybody sort of felt like the show was sort of special to them. And he was just really successful at that till he was too old to, do it anymore. And it was great because my mom went with him, and they toured all over the world. And, my father never, ever held a day job. He worked his entire life. He bought a house. He put me through all of my ridiculous ballet school, which is, ballet is also not a cheap art form. It takes a lot of money because you go through a pair of toe shoes, in a month or a couple of weeks sometimes. It's a lot of cash flow to keep it going. While he never became like a household name, he never ever did anything but comedy, and that's how he supported us, and that's very admirable and unusual. My parents looked at it differently. They were pissed, but I thought that's a great thing. If you never held a day job, then you made your money the way you were supposed to make your money.
We have a clip of your dad doing stand-up in his capacity as the king of the high seas.
Oh, Jesus.
This is a clip from a cruise to Mexico on the Celebrity Mercury.
Okay.
But I wanted to see Mazatlan, so I go out in the terminal, all I see are buses, 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 buses. All those buses, and they have no place to go. Now I know why I can't get a bus in New York. They're all in Cabo San Lucas. I got on one of the buses. The man took me to the Golden Zone. He took me to the El Cid Hotel. He took me to a beautiful church that was packed with passengers all praying they'd never have to come back to Mazatlan again. And then they brought us to Acapulco, which is Mazatlan spelled backwards. Acapulco, that's like a Kmart that's out of control.
He's a funny dude.
He's selling them too. I don't think that there was anybody in that audience who wasn't bowled over. You know what I mean?
Oh no, my dad was. I'm telling you, because he would go on these cruises, and it was the greatest gig in the world. Because he would do. They build these beautiful theaters on these boats. They're like 1,500 seat theaters. It's ridiculous, and they have two shows. And he would go on, and he would do basically one night. He would do two shows, and that was it. That's how he made. And the rest of the time, he hung out on the cruises, and it would always happen about midway through the cruise. So the cruise would start, and everyone's happy and feeling great. And 2 days in, the fathers especially start to realize they've been had, and nothing is free like they thought it was, and nothing's included like they thought it was, and the kids are starting to get weird and hang out in like hallways at night, and everyone's sort of squabbling and turning on each other. And then my dad would come on halfway through the cruise, and all he would do was that and talk about how ridiculous the cruises were, and it was like therapy. So everybody was like, "Yes, someone understands us. Somebody feels our pain," and like it would like literally alleviate the tension. And I believe he saved marriages. He saved people from throwing their children overboard. I mean, there was all sorts of things that could have happened if it continued down the road it was going. It was a great gig for him, and he was really great at it, and he loved doing it. So, there you go. I mean, occasionally, you get sick because everyone gets sick on those cruises because they're filthy. But other than that, it was a delightful experience.
How old were you when you and your writing partner got the job on Roseanne?
I was 20, 23, 24. I was young. I was so young.
And it was season 3 of Roseanne, right? Was your first year?
My first year was season 3. I was there 3, 4, 5, 6.
My Roseanne history is a little blurry at the edges, but that's kind of in.
So is hers. So there you go. But I'm bummed. We'll be here all night.
That's kind of in between the most intense madness of Roseanne, right? Like the first and second season was when all of the people who, had been installed were getting uninstalled.
Yes.
And later on was when things maybe production-wise got a little batty. What was it like working on that show?
Well, season 3 especially was great. My first year. And was it 4, season 3 and 4? I think those are the two really, really great years. Bob Myers was running the show, and he was a great showrunner. Like, he was an old school showrunner. He came up like My Two Dads and like old school sitcom. And we didn't have a table. We sat in his office on couches, and we each held our own pad and wrote our own notes. Like, a writer's assistant didn't sit in there and type incessantly. Like, it was it was very, very old. It was very Mary Tyler Moore. I mean, Dick Van Dyke. Like, where you just sort of like sat around and kind of riffed, and it didn't have a corporate feeling at all. It really felt like what my vision of a writer's room still is. And because she had gone through all the madness of breaking up with her husband, and she was together with Tom, and they sort of fired everybody, and they'd sort of taken over the show. It was those 2 years especially were very sort of like great oases, because she was happy and she was very focused on her relationship. And she had also banned the studio and the network from the set. So my first experience in a show, there were no studio and network notes. I didn't know they could give notes. I had literally no idea, because it was just very much the writers, and then the writers with Roseanne, or the writers with the actors. It was the way, to me, it should be. Like, we would come in, we'd break our stories, we'd write our scripts, we'd do our table reads, we'd go back, we'd talk about it, we'd do our fixes, and the next day. And it wasn't until I got off of Roseanne and I was on another show, and I was there 4 years, so I left a supervising producer, and I went on to another show, and I was like, who are all these people sitting around this table, and why are we listening to them? Like, someone had to say to me, this is the network in the studio. And I'm like, so what? We have work to do. And we have to wait and get their notes. It was like a foreign concept to me, that suddenly there was this layer between the writers and the actors. And it was, so basically Roseanne prepared me completely for what I'm doing, and yet didn't prepare me at all for the actual business of show, because I sort of grew up in a utopian writer's room. It was Xanadu. And then seasons, the last 2 seasons that I was there, Bob left, and then the staff started to get ridiculously big, and she started to get more unhappy with Tom, and then things sort of shifted. And when I left, I was ready. I was ready to go.
I want to play a scene from one of my guest Amy Sherman-Palladino's episodes of Roseanne back in the day. So in this episode, Becky, who's one of Roseanne's daughters, has run away from home, and she's staying with Aunt Jackie. Mm-hmm. And Darlene comes in to check on her sister.
What did Mom do that was so horrible?
Everything. She wouldn't let me see Mark.
Well, you saw him anyway.
Well, I had to lie about it.
You didn't lie. I lied. I covered for you, and I got grounded, and you don't even care.
I am sorry, Darlene, all right?
No, you're getting off way too easy, Becky.
Go home, Darlene.
Look, Jackie is putting up with you. Mom and Dad are impossible. Mom and Jackie are fighting. Everybody's yelling at everybody else, and nobody's saying what they should be saying. Becky, you're a selfish, inconsiderate, spoiled little brat.
Yeah. Those kids were really good.
Yeah. I really
Gilmore,
agree.
Man. She was really good. But Lisi was great, too. They were just great, those
Everyone,
two.
I mean, one of the things about Roseanne is
the cast was sensational.
Every single person on the show is extraordinarily good. And, you start with one of the most specific and powerful comic voices of her generation, one that was needed and important. And then you just add exceptionally great actors who are also really funny. Like anytime, you could be like, oh yeah, and number 3 on the call sheet is Laurie Metcalf, Yeah,
I know. And Laurie was the kind of person, what I learned also on Roseanne is that comedy was not about jokes. And Roseanne didn't have a joke quota. There was no mandate that we had to leave a scene on a joke. There was no mandate of how many jokes had to be on a page. It was all about people talking to each other. And Laurie was somebody that you could give something to, that the joke was not in the structure of the words, but you knew how she was going to make it funny because she was just like that brilliant. And that's another, very strong lesson to learn, that it's not always about but-ump-bump. It's about, what are they saying to each other? What's the situation? And really knowing who your characters are and what their voices are and what point of view they're going to come at, because that's where the comedy is going to come. And those two girls were just great because they knew how to just play it. They were just so real. They were such real teenagers. They drove you crazy the way that teenagers were supposed to drive you crazy, but they really just were. I think that those were the two best teenage characters on television, almost comedy and drama ever, were Lucy and Sarah.
There's so much fear and anger in Roseanne that you don't find in a lot of family sitcoms. It typically gets resolved. I mean, that's what a sitcom is for. But it, and I mean, I guess it must just come from Roseanne's voice as a comic, but like there is real dark feelings in that show that were so uncommon on, even like the, Norman Lear sitcoms of the 70s. Like there's so many people getting in real fights and people really being freaked out about circumstances in their life, economic circumstances and elsewhere. That you don't get in, you weren't getting in other even good sitcoms of the time.
Well, the best comedy is drama. And the best dramas are comedies. Sopranos was one of the funniest shows on television. So I to me, like, comedy and drama are simply, one is less pages than the other, because it really is like great comedy. Is going to be willing to go for those moments and go for the real moments. That's where you're going to get the real funny, but then you're going to really knock someone on. Like, to me, that's great comedy, and that's what great drama is too. It's because it's about, again, the mantra on Roseanne was make the big small, make the small big. That was the thing. It wasn't about like a big situation. It was about the small thing that happens in life that throws people off kilter. And that's something that I have taken to heart for the rest of my career, because I think it's the most important thing.
My interview with the great Amy Sherman-Palladino continues after a quick break. Still to come, do you love the Gilmore Girls? She did not even mean to pitch the Gilmore Girls in the meeting where she sold the Gilmore Girls. It's Bullseye for MaximumFun.org and NPR. Support for this podcast and the following message come from ZipRecruiter. Hiring used to be hard. Multiple job sites, stacks of resumes. But today, hiring can be easy, and you only have to go to one place to get it done: ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter sends your job to over 100 of the web's leading job boards. Then, ZipRecruiter scans thousands of resumes to find people with the right experience and invite them to apply for your job. Try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/bullseye.
Just a few years before starring in Book of Mormon, Andrew Rannells was way off Broadway, doing, and I quote, "It's Karate Kid, the musical."
This is the punctuation. It's Karate, Kid, the musical, for legal purposes.
The stories behind the celebrities, every Tuesday on It's Been a Minute from NPR.
I'm Riley Smurl.
I'm Sydney McElroy.
And I'm Taylor Smurl.
And together, we host a podcast called Still Buffering, where we answer questions like,
why should I not fall asleep first at a slumber party?
How do I be fleet? Is it okay to break up with someone using emojis?
And sometimes we talk about butts.
No, we don't. Nope. Find out the answers to these important questions and many more on Still Buffering, a sister's guide to teens through the ages.
I am a teenager.
And I was too. Butts.
No.
It's Bullseye. I'm Jesse Thorn. My guest is Amy Sherman-Palladino. She's the creator of The Marvelous Mrs Maisel. It's been nominated for a boatload of Emmys, including Outstanding Comedy Series and Best Directing. I heard somewhere that when you sold the Gilmore Girls was not the pitch that you had brought into the room intending to sell. Is that true?
It wasn't even one of the first 5 pitches that I brought into the room. It was literally the afterthought pitch because I had a whole other pitch. I had optioned an article and I worked on it, and then I had like a couple of back.
What was the article about?
It was actually a really great article. It was about a girl who was a Filipino girl. Her parents were very, very traditional, old country, and she was the first generation American kid born. And she was really smart, and she started a zine. Like her was not a traditional beauty. She was just like a really interesting, smart girl, and like she was so admired at school. And like her boyfriend was the handsome like captain of the football team. She was just a very interesting individual, but she had a big battle between the traditional role that her parents thought that she should be fulfilling as a girl in a Filipino family, and a very American-born girl who wanted to be an American girl. And it was a great series, and they just wanted to order lunch the whole time I was talking. So apparently I was the only one who thought it was great.
And I mean, you were in there with the that was like really working on and selling a really particular thing,
yes,
which was a relatively new phenomenon in television. Like, there was original programming on cable, but not that much of it.
Mm-hmm.
And network television programs were still by and large designed to appeal to everyone. And the idea that that this network was making programming for, minded younger women significantly was a big deal at the time. And it sounds like they just heard, oh, it's a mom and a daughter who are friends as much as they are mom and daughter. And we're like, yeah, that's a thing that makes sense with our thing.
Yeah, that was literally the pitch. It was just, it's a mom and daughter, and they're just more best friends than mom and dad. Like, okay, go write that. And I walked out, and I turned to Gavin Polone, who was my manager at the time, and I said, I don't know what that show is. Like, it was a sentence. And he goes, well, go find out. So it's like, well, now you got to go home and figure it out because we just sold it. So that's basically the way Gilmore was sold. But you know what? To be honest with you, that's the way Bunheads came about, and that's the way Maisel came about. Every time I've walked into a room with a really like plan, it's never been the same as I'm just in a room shooting my mouth off as usual, talking a mile a minute, wearing a hat that makes everybody nervous, and then something I say sparks somebody who's huddled in a corner and peeks their head out for 5 seconds from behind their hands and go write that. Now, maybe they just want to get me out of the room, but it's like literally every single time I've on all 3 of those shows, it's kind of all happened the same way.
Gilmore Girls, I think, also carries like a very specific kind of television fantasy in a very unusual way. Like there are whole, I don't know if this is still the watchword at USA, but for a long time, USA was supposed to be the Blue Skies network, right? And it was like,
were they?
Yeah. And, all the procedurals, including the really great one, Monk is a great show, were all, they had their elements of conflict, but the goal was to give you an escapist experience. And Gilmore Girls has some of those qualities, especially in its setting. You know what I mean? Like
Stars Hollow, yeah, absolutely.
It's in kind of a dream town,
mm-hmm.
which I mean like both like the kind of town you would like to live in and the kind of town that kind of shares qualities with a dream. You know what I mean? Like, but at the same time, there are a lot of weird edges in there in a way that those kinds of shows don't typically have. You know, usually they have like one edge, you know? And I'm just, I don't know. I think it's cool that it was on TV for so long. You know what I mean?
I think it's amazing it was on TV for so long. It was, you know, Gilmore was basically, it was based on a tragedy. It's a tragedy. It was the disillusion of a family. It was a girl who rejected everything that her parents stood for. And even to the very end of Gilmore Girls, rift was never healed. It's what drove the narrative of Gilmore Girls was alienation and pain. You know, I mean, Emily only got a relationship with her granddaughter out of blackmail, you know, and only got her daughter back into her life via blackmail. That is the basis of Gilmore Girls. It's just that they happened to live in this very cute, quirky town that was fun and because the point of the whole thing was, to me, like, if the family you have doesn't work out, go out and create a family that does. And that's what, that's what Lorelai did. She found this place that she felt like family, and that's how her family in her mind would relate to each other, because her family did not do that for her. And so I think that the rough edges just come from the fact that this whole thing is based on people that were very hurtful to each other on all sides. Yay! Da 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 da.
Yeah, I mean, like, I feel like the difference between Gilmore being a sitcom and being a drama, besides the number of pages, I mean, I'm sure that you could write a drama's worth of pages for a sitcom script, being who you are, that being your superpower. But one of the big differences is, like, all sitcoms are based on a family that is, you know, made unresolved and then resolves. Like, there is something that creates a disjuncture in the family, and then the narrative of the show and the relationships come back together at the end. Like, you know, whether it's a literal family or whether it's, you know, the people who know your name at the bar, right?
Right.
And Gilmore Girls, what's special about it, I think, is that it has that kind of classic sitcoms ersatz family, right? It's Lauren Graham's character and her daughter and her best friend and her friend down at the diner, and depending on the season, the person she's having a romance with. But it's also it's also one of the realities of that family is that her family is fundamentally broken.
Completely broken.
Yeah.
And absolutely completely broken and doesn't understand each other at all.
Yeah.
They literally, they had 7 years of talking to each other and they still didn't understand each other. Like, they just did not, she did not understand her mother, and her mother just did not understand her daughter. And then eventually, like, Rory was sort of stuck in the middle because she wanted her mother was her best friend, and she wanted a relationship with her grandmother. But it's like, how do you pick sides? It was a war. It was an emotional war. And the interesting thing about Gilmore Girls, and I will say I've always given them credit for this, the one really good note in my entire career that I've gotten was when I wrote the pilot initially, or when I pitched the pilot initially. I didn't pitch it. I pitched it up to the first Friday night dinner, and to me, episode 1 was that Friday night dinner. And Suzanne Daniels said to me, "Boy, I'd really like to see that Friday night dinner." And I'm like, "All right." You know, I didn't know. I came from a half hour. I'm like, "That's just more pages, right? Okay, I'll just," and literally, it was the Friday night dinner and the battleground and setting the battle lines in that house, that was going to be the house where war took place, that I believe got it on the air and made the show. I think without that scene, it would have been lighter and fluffy, and it would not have had the weight of, oh, these people are really going to do battle with each other. There's going to be, there will be blood. And that was a great note. And I will, my hat's off to Suzanne for making me do it.
Let's talk a little bit about Mrs. Maisel. I read somewhere, and this may or may not be true, that you obviously have collaborators in writing the show, including your husband, who has been a creative partner and business partner with you for quite a long time. But I read that you personally wrote her stand-up. Is that actually true?
Well, we write her stand-up. I mean, Dan and I, if it's Dan's script, he'll write it. If it's my script, I'll write it. But we always write her stand-up because her stand-up comes from story. That's how it was conceived because we had to decide I had to decide what kind of comic she was going to be. And my father was a observational. I mean, you saw that he was a ranter. He was a stream of conscious kind of guy. The people that I admire, the Mel Brooks, so that they just blathered funny. And that was the kind of comedy that I loved, and the kind of comedy that I thought if you take an actress who wasn't a comic, you got to give her a way into the character that she's going to be able to understand, because it's a whole different muscle being a stand-up comic. It's a very different way of thinking and creating your voice, and I needed to give an actress a way to get in there that she could understand. And I thought, well, you make sure that every act she has is grounded in something that's happening in the episode. So she's basically staying on story. And because of that, because it comes from the character, it comes from the story, that's something that we can do. I don't write bump jokes. We've got some very, very good road comics who come in and help us, especially because we have so much comedy in it. We have so many stand-up routines. And they help punch up and things like that. So they're involved in the whole process. I'm not trying to diminish their accomplishments or because they're very important to me, and if they leave me, I'll kill them. But the crux of what her comedy has to be, it's intertwined with what we're writing anyhow.
So I am not a singer. You would know that if I, sang. I am actually a comedian. I talk to people for a living. Not that I'm making a living. Really, this whole comedian thing was all just a ruse to get on this telethon today. Mason, I'll take that $78,000 now in small bills. Arthritis be damned. That's right. This is an extremely unlikely stick-up. The only witnesses being some drunk cameramen, 3 sailors on leave, and 14 people half asleep in front of their TV.
She's good.
She's a natural. She's all that.
Were you worried that you would get it wrong somehow? I mean, I remember when Studio 60 was on TV, how mad every sketch and improv friend I had was about the sketches on that show that they had decided to show.
Yeah. Yes, actually. We were very concerned because the world it's very specific, and it's a hard world to show people. When you're in a club, you think God, there's so many weird people here and interesting relationships, and it would be but the thing about comedy and comedy clubs is they're very sad places. They're not inherently funny places, because most good comedy comes from pain and unhappiness, and a lot of comics are not happy pappy campers off stage. That's why they're funny on stage. So there's a lot of darkness to a comedy club that I think when people think, oh, you do something in a comedy club, it's just going to be so funny and everyone's going to be sitting around making each other laugh. And it's but that was not my experience, with my father, his friends, or my friends who were stand-ups, or, when I worked in the Comedy Store for a while. Not as a stand-up, just worked there. So it was very observational. I didn't see this happy, funny, hilarity world. I saw a lot of dark souls going through there. And so, and it's like they've been trying to crack how to be a chef and show that on television. I don't think that's a world that anybody has figured out how to show people. So what we've tried to do is make sure that, because Midge is a complete novice to this, she had no knowledge of how to go about this. We sort of felt like as long as we are going through it through her eyes, it's easier to sort of show people what the world is because she's experiencing it firsthand. And we're not saying, hey, here's the world fully formed. You know, she's learning how to be a comic. She's learning what it is to put an act together. She's learning what it is to bomb and not succeed or be alone or have to make choices that she wouldn't have had to make if she was just living on the Upper West Side and going to the butcher shop every day. So because we decided a long time ago, this is not, when I pitched this, I said, this is not the story of a stand-up comic. It's a story of a woman who hits a point in her life and she discovers a whole other way to live her life. And the idea of taking a woman who was not a 1950s housewife who was dissatisfied with her life or staring out a window thinking there's something better out there, but a woman who really loved her life, who really thought, I've scored, this is great, having that ripped out from under her and then discovering this whole other way to live. That was a journey that I thought was worth taking. And because her life blows up, everybody's life around her blows up. So it was not about, I'm just going to show you what it's like to be a stand-up comic. It's just an element of what this woman is. It's as much a buddy comedy with her and Susie. It's as much a family story with her and her family. It's much a starry-eyed crossed lovers story with her and Joel, who really do love each other, but were sort of children and blind when they went into their marriage and probably will never figure out how to be together, even though at the end they'll be in the pool like Desi and Lucy with the kids and the other spouses are walking around the background and they don't give what they're doing. They're just dealing with each other. There's so many family dynamics going on there that, to me, the comedy is just one element of it.
What have you learned in the course of making now 3 seasons of this show about that character that you didn't plan going in?
That I'm going to die very soon. It's all going to come. Well, you learn how hard it is to do a period show just on a nuts and bolts level. It's really hard. I've learned the value of, if you don't have all the best people around you, you will fail no matter how good the script is when you're taking on something like this. And I've learned that once you commit to a road, you can't veer off that road. So our road is this woman and her world expanding. We can't suddenly take her off that journey. We have to, we're all in. And at some point, somebody's going to put the brakes on and go, see ya, parking passes revoked. We're done. But it is an all-in commitment on this show, and it's full steam ahead on every episode. And we've got the actors who are willing to do it. We've got the crew that can shoot it. And as long as everybody stays alive, it's even if we fail, it doesn't matter, because it's about just pushing that forward and not being afraid or worried that we're not going to live up to whatever we've set up before. It's just about, you got to keep going. You got to keep, shark. You keep moving or you die.
Amy, I'm so grateful to you for taking all this time to be on Bullseye. It was really nice to get to talk to you.
It was lovely to talk to you too, sir.
Thanks again to Amy Sherman-Palladino. Maybe brew yourself a pot of coffee and watch some Gilmore Girls. You can catch up on all of the episodes of the Emmy-nominated Marvelous Mrs Maisel on Amazon Prime right now. We've come to the end of another episode of Bullseye. Bullseye is produced at MaximumFun.org World Headquarters, overlooking MacArthur Park in the beautiful Westlake District of Los Angeles, California. This week in the park, our producer Raghu saw a man carrying a parrot around the lake, and they both looked like they were having a very nice day out. Our show is produced by Speaking Into Microphones. Our producer is Kevin Ferguson. He's away from the office. Raghu Manavalan fills in for him. Jesus Ambrosio is our associate producer. We got help from Casey O'Brien. Our production fellow is Jordan Cowling, who maybe in the credits I made fun of a little bit for having a framed Gallagher album on her wall, but then she explained it all to me, and she actually has a pretty good reason to have a framed Gallagher album on her wall, and I can't get into the whole thing, but let's just suffice it to say, I take it back. She was right. Our interstitial music is by DJ W, also known as Dan Wally. Thank you to Dan for sharing it with us. Our theme song is Huddle Formation by the Go Team. Our thanks to the Go Team and to their label Memphis Industries. And before you go, Bullseye has 20 years of archives. Well, 18 or 19 years of archives. Hundreds of interviews with incredible guests. You can check them all out on our website at MaximumFun.org, or you can also find them in your favorite podcast app. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Just search for Bullseye with Jesse Thorn. All of this week's interviews will be up on YouTube, so you can keep up with the show there or share those or whatever you'd like to do. And I think that's about it. Just remember, all great radio hosts have a signature sign-off.
Bullseye with Jesse Thorn is a production of MaximumFun.org and is distributed by NPR.